That basically entails the exam. Now, the officer is also going to go over the citizenship application with you. And if the officer believes that you are not understanding the questions that they are asking you, then at that point they can stop the interview and tell you that you're going to have to come back. Because again, you have to have that knowledge, in most cases, knowledge of English. So if you don't pass your exam or you don't understand, they don't think you're understanding what they're asking you, they will give you a second opportunity. Generally, they'll schedule a second interview, and we see that to have generally 30 to 60 days after the first interview. And if you don't pass at that second time, then you're going to have to start all over again. So, very important to study for the exam and also understand what it is that they're asking or what they could potentially ask you during the exam, during the interview. Now, one of the questions that we get is, are there exemptions to the exam, or can I take it in my native language? Well, it depends. There are medical exemptions. So, if the applicant has a medical condition that will affect their ability to memorize or learn information, and their doctor signs this form and explains what is this medical condition, how long is this medical condition expected to last, how does it affect them in terms of being able to take the exam or maybe even answer questions. If that is completed, that is submitted with the citizenship application. The officer will review it and make a determination at the interview whether they agree that yes, this is sufficient to give them an exemption. And if you have that exemption, then generally, well, if that exemption is granted, then the person does not have to do the civics exam. In these extreme cases where maybe someone has dementia and they're already under some sort of guardianship, then there are situations where if the person doesn't have the capability to take the oath, then at that point the caretaker, the appointed guardian, is going to be the one that will sign for them, and we have to establish and show that documentation that there is this legal guardianship over this individual. So there is medical exemption for certain individuals. One of the questions that we sometimes get is, well, my parent wants to become a US citizen, but they can't read or write. They never learned how to read or write. That's not going to be sufficient. It has to be some sort of medical condition that can be established and that they can show that it affects them in terms of memorizing information or learning or processing information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are situations where the applicant can take the exam in their native language, and there are two requirements to this: age and how long the person has had their lawful permanent residency. So, if the person has been a lawful permanent resident for 20 years or longer and is at least 50 years or older, at that point the person can take the exam in their native language. Or if the person is 55 years of age or older and has had their lawful permanent residency for 15 years, then at that point as well, the person can take their exam in their native language. And this is important to let the officer know if you meet those requirements, because we have seen situations where sometimes the officer is attempting to have the applicant do the exam in English, where the applicant meets these language requirement, or meets the requirement where they can take the exam in their native language. Now, a very important question that I get is, what are some rights and benefits of becoming a US citizen? So one of them is you have the right to remain here in the United States, or likewise, if you decide in the future that you want to retire outside the United States, maybe at a beach somewhere, well, if you're a US citizen, you can do that without worrying about losing your status. Whereas a lawful permanent resident, remember, you're saying that you are living in the United States. And if you're a lawful permanent resident and you want to retire in the future somewhere outside the United States, well, you are at risk of losing your residency if you relocate to another place. Because again, lawful permanent residence, you're establishing your residency here in the United States. So that's one of the big reasons for becoming a U.S. citizen, especially if you think that you would like to retire in the future elsewhere. Another thing would be the eligibility to obtain your U.S. passport to travel internationally. Depending where the applicant is from, sometimes certain countries it is hard to travel internationally because a visa is required to enter those countries. So, for example, U.S. citizens at this moment can travel to Europe without a visa. There are equivalent programs to what we have as ESTA, but other countries, like I said, it's much more difficult to travel into certain countries. So, as a U.S. citizen, you have the capability to travel internationally and travel in many situations without acquiring a visa, without the need for a visa. You also get, very important, the right to vote. Um, Only U.S. citizens can vote here in the United States. So that is a major reason as to why certain individuals decide to become U.S. citizens. Not only the right to vote, but you also get the right to hold an elected official position in the U.S. government, or if you want to apply for certain jobs with the U.S. government, U.S. citizenship is a requirement. So that's also another motivating factor for certain individuals to become U.S. citizens. One other major reason is you get to petition for more relatives. As a lawful permanent resident, you can file a petition for your spouse. You can also file a petition for your child, as long as that child remains single. And it doesn't matter if the child turns 21, the child has to remain single. And this is very important because certain countries like India, China, Mexico, the Philippines have really long wait times. And so sometimes, let's say, the parent files for their child before the child turns 18 years of age. Well, if they're from one of these countries, it could take sometimes maybe 10, 12 years or longer to finally get to the place where you can finally get your residency. And if the child marries within that time period, and the parent is still a lawful permanent resident, well, that child is no longer going to be eligible to continue their residency case because of that marriage. So it's very important. Uh, in many situations where the parent is a lawful permanent resident, they want to continue the process with their child. For their child, their child's already an adult, way over 21 years of age. Um, Becoming a U.S. citizen is important because as a U.S. citizen, you can file a petition for more family members. As a U.S. citizen, you can file for your spouse, you can file for your child, and here it doesn't matter if your child is single, married, under 21, over 21. The U.S. citizen has the right to file a petition for that child. And then in this case, it doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen and you're filing for your child and your child is single at the time that you file, but once they get, maybe 2 years later they get married, well, you can still continue the process. They're just going to change into different categories. Um, they'll change from an F1 to an F3 preference category, but you're still eligible to file that petition. And also, as a U.S. citizen, if you're 21 years of age or older, you can file for your parent. And as a U.S. citizen, you can file a petition for your sibling. And when you're filing a petition for your sibling, if your sibling is married or gets married in the future and has children under 21 years of age, at that time that the visa becomes available, the immigrant visa, well, you can bring that whole family over into the United States. Um, these are really important reasons as to why people decide to become U.S. citizens. Another big one is if you are a lawful permanent resident, you filed residency for your child gets residency, that child is under 18 years of age. When you become a U.S. citizen, well, then that child automatically acquires citizenship. And the benefit of that is, one, your child is a U.S. citizen without having to apply for it, because you've now become a U.S. citizen. And in that case, you can just go ahead and file for a U.S. passport for that child, or you can also file for a certificate of citizenship. So, becoming a U.S. citizen is a personal choice. Every individual gets to make the decision as to whether they want to become a U.S. citizen or not. But I know midterm elections are coming next year. I know a lot of people are scared of what's happening at this moment or are fearful that they may lose their residency. So, if you are thinking about becoming a US citizen, I would say definitely right now is the time to do it. If there are some questions that you have, or maybe there was a situation again, like a criminal case against you, and you want to make sure that you are in fact eligible to apply for citizenship. If you have any questions and you would like to consult with our office, you can call my office number. It is 972-827-8359. So again, if you're interested in becoming a US citizen, you've been a little hesitant about it, but you think you're ready, go ahead and apply. Just make sure you do qualify, because we want to make sure that no one files when they really aren't eligible for filing. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you.